All too well. Jack eyed the preacher warily. He'd been keen originally to hear this new preacher speak, what with everyone talking about her. It had taken a week to convince Darad to make the long march down to Gildenheim. Now all he could think about was leaving. But Darad was hanging on the preacher's every word. At this rate, he was going to be stuck here till she ran out of words. The Empire have done nothing for the Septs, not for the Ilumrom, not for the Urende, not for the Ethengror, the preacher bellowed. They freed them from the Druge, shouted an orc somewhere off to Jack's left. Did they? The preacher shouted back. They freed Ossium from the Druge, and they gave it to the Varushkans. The Septs were just baggage we had to pick up. Jack rolled his eyes. He was pretty sure it was the freeborn army that picked up the baggage, but this Bracalo didn't seem interested in anything other than where they ended up. Come on, he said to Darad. Let's head into the city and get something to eat. His friend only shook his hand away, not even taking his eyes off the preacher who was still ranting on. They come running to us when there's wars to be fought. There's always white granite for fancy roads in the League and canals in the marches. But when we want something, when we need something, we all know too well the treasury is empty. We're at war! We have to put the Empire first! Jack was surprised to discover it was him shouting at the preacher. He hadn't realised how much he'd got under his skin. That's what they always say. Put the Empire first. Do you know what actually happens to nations that put the Empire first? The preacher paused dramatically to draw breath before roaring back. They get fucked! There was an audible gasp from the crowd. The preacher had gone too far for many. A few people started walking away, clearly disgusted. What are you saying? Demanded one of the crowd angrily. What can we do about it? Asked another who seemed more sceptical than outrage. Stop fighting. The preacher had finally stopped shouting, perhaps exhausted by their efforts to date. Think about what Rykana and Wessex did. Maybe the Empire has taken our willingness to fight for granted for a little bit too long. One season in which our armies weren't champing at the bit to die like Druge slaves for the Empire, and look what happened. Think about it. We've got the two largest, strongest armies in the Empire. That's leverage, that is. And with enough leverage... Overview. A year ago, a host of Ossium orcs arrived in Skarsind, guided by the Freeborn, to new homes far away from the Druge who once ruled them. A number of orcs had already become Imperial orcs by the time they reached Skarsind, arriving not as people fleeing the horrors of the East, but as people coming home at last to a homeland they had never known. In the season since, more of them have found a place not only in Skarsind, but as part of the nation. There are three very obvious exceptions, however. Three of the largest septs of Ossium, the Ethengror, the Ilumrom, and Urende, maintain their own cultures and traditions in the face of ruthless Druge oppression. They have a strong identity of their own, one that they are not keen to abandon now that they are free once again. Unlike the freed Yarmish slaves, the Dutraeg refugees, and the former gladiators of Berida, or even the much more recent arrivals of the Tamazi, the three septs still remain apart from the nation. Urged by their ancestors, they have no intention of giving up the traditions that helped them survive the Druge without giving in to despair. Before they left Ossium, they heard the preachers promise that their pride would carry them to new lives and a new future free from fear. This same pride, however, makes them want to make sure that their traditions and culture are respected by their new neighbours. They are friendly with their new neighbours, but they require reassurance before they are open to joining the Imperial Orc Nation and becoming Imperial citizens. Metal, bone, and soil. For each of the three Ossium septs, there is a structure that will help integrate them into the Imperial Orcs. Each of the septs has their own law that could strengthen the Imperial Orcs. Each of the septs have their own traditions that would change the Imperial Orc Nation. Each of the Ossium septs has a request that, once fulfilled, will give them the reassurance they want that they would be welcome amongst the Imperial Orcs without compromising their identity. The Ethengror, proud warriors bereft of their warrior traditions, would be reassured by a grand armoury. The mystic shamans of the Ilumrom request a grand ossuary within which the bones of their honoured ancestors could be laid, perhaps alongside those of the Imperial Orcs. The herb masters and magicians of the Urende ask for a garden where they could cultivate cuttings of the plants they smuggled out of Ossium. In each case, the civil service assessed a commission that would satisfy their needs and smooth the way towards the septs in question joining the Imperial Orcs nation as citizens. None of the three was precisely cheap. In the years since, there has been little official movement on any of the three follies. The Imperial Orcs Assembly did enact a mandate requested by the Ilumnorm that confirmed their beliefs do not clash with either the doctrine of the Ancestors or the doctrine of the Howling Abyss, reassuring the Sept that there would be no spiritual issue with their neighbours. In the months since, the three Septs have settled into their new homes, happy to trade with their Imperial Orc neighbours, but have kept themselves to themselves. The situation looks like it could easily become the new status quo, but not everybody is of mind to accept that. Fury on the Mountain. A fiery Orc preacher has denounced the Empire's attitude to the Imperial Orcs. They have only a small following, but their words strike a chord with some of their neighbours. During the summer solstice, the Imperial Orc generals took the unprecedented move of withdrawing their armies to Skarsind and refusing to fight for the Empire, whilst they remained allies with the slave-owning nation of Otkedov. The matter appears resolved. The Thule dragons have decreed an end to the practice in the north. The move received extensive support in the Orcs, the nation. It also offered inspiration to a fiery young preacher named Stonecliff Bracalo, who has spent the last 6 months or so speaking passionately on the streets of Gildenheim. Her concern is that the Empire tells the Imperial Orcs they must take in all Orcs that come to the Empire, but they offer little actual aid to deal with the realities of the situation. The Empire has multiple titles whose responsibility involves helping new citizens find their place in the Empire, such as the Freeborn Hand of the Gera, Dornish Lady of the Prophet Hand, and the new Hall of the Unbroken in Sermasuak. But where are those nations when there is practical work to be done? The Synod talks a lot about freeing people from slavery, but how does it actually help those people when they are in the Empire? Who, other than perhaps Pontus figures, has actually done anything practical to help the Septs and the Orcs of Skarsind? When Bloodcrow Udu raised their statement of principle in the General Assembly in spring, it received plenty of support, but that support didn't lead to anything. And it doesn't escape Stonecliff Bracalo's that the Empire didn't support Bloodcrow Udu sufficiently to provide a greater majority in what should, in theory, have been a straightforward expression of solidarity. The Empire has a legacy of slavery, but your spirits do not. Take pride in this Empire that we have forged together free from chains. The Imperial Orcs undertake a great endeavour to build an ossuary worthy of pilgrimage, to lay rest to the bones of those Orcs who died in chains and fall in battle, and welcome those of the Ilumnorm. We call upon the nations of the Empire to summon their pride and aid the Imperial Orcs in this endeavour. Let us forge an ossuary built with the immense pride we all share in what this Empire has become, free from chains. Bloodcrow Udu, Spring Equinox 384YE, General Assembly, upheld 1,674 votes to 90 votes. It seems, says Stonecliff Bracalo bitterly, that the Empire is happy to rescue people and claim the rewards that come with it, but reticent to do anything after that. Where is the Senate, the very body that ratifies treaties with slavers, while all this is going on? Where are the holders of bourse seats? It is clear from the commissions announced each season that there is no shortage of wains in the Empire, no shortage of money. It also seems clear that statements of principle have no influence over the people, with the power to actually help integrate the Septs in Skarsind. It seems the only thing they will listen to is action. It is clear that the Imperial Orcs will need to rely on themselves, says Stonecliff Bracalo. The first thing to do is get all 3 commissions started as soon as possible, by whatever means. Doing so will require Senate motions. The Legion engineer can't commission a folly, and even if they could, only the Senate has the power to concede one to a Sept. Perhaps those nations who talk about freeing slaves and embracing Orcs could be called upon to put their money where their mouth is and raise the motions needed. Then, any Imperial citizen, Orc or otherwise, can put their hands in their pockets and prove their commitments to the ideals they espouse so easily when it doesn't cost them anything. Once a commission is started, anyone can contribute it. And right now, Stonecliff Bracalo points out that right now there are an awful lot of wains of white granite, weirwood, and mithril in the Empire. Wains taken from the vaults of the most wicked slavers in the known world, the slave lords of Rushengrab. Maybe some of those wains could be contributed to helping the Ilumnorm, the Ethingraw, and the Urende actually find new homes in Skarsind. For some Imperial Orcs, Stonecliff Bracalo's anger is infectious and her dissent compelling. Her voice has been getting louder since the autumn equinox, but it is when she suggests a practical solution that her support begins to grow significantly. She urges all Imperial Orcs to consider using the one weapon the Orcs have that the Empire seems to actually respect. Following the example of General Rykana and General Wessex, the people of Skarsind should withdraw from the Empire's wars. The army should return to Skarsind and stay there, and the legions should either spend their time garrisoning the Will or pursuing well-paying opportunities. Better yet, they could put aside their swords permanently and make new lives. After all, if the Imperial Orcs are to find the money for 180 wains and 50 thrones by themselves, they would need farmers and merchants to fight on their behalf. Answer courage with wisdom. Nobody who has heard her speak can doubt Bracalo's sincerity. She invokes the virtues of courage, pride, and prosperity, and openly declares that her heart's loyalty is to the people of Scarsind, rather than the Empire as a whole. This is one of the reasons she does not come to Anvil, she says. Her interest is focused on her own people. Regardless of her sincerity, however, her impassioned speeches are having a disruptive effect on the people of Scarsind. She has not broken any laws. She isn't even urging people to break laws on her behalf. It is entirely legal for generals to choose what their armies do, or for a leader to determine what their warband does. Perhaps answering Bracalo falls to the Synod. It is in the arena of faith that she has chosen to challenge the Empire. There are two potential mandates that the Imperial Orc National Assembly could enact. Stonecliff Bracalo demands the aid of the Empire, but if we are to keep our pride, we must stand on our own feet. We will face the challenge presented by the Septs of Ossium and whatever other orcs seek new homes within the Empire, and when we triumph, we will do so with virtue. We send, named priest, with 50 doses of Liao to challenge Bracalo's anger with wisdom and vigilance, and urge her to find another cause. Synod Mandate, Imperial Orc National Assembly. If this mandate were enacted, it would stop Stonecliff Bracalo in her tracks. She would have a small following still, but her legs would be cut out from underneath her. She would have no further effect on the nation. Stonecliff Bracalo shows courage, and we recognise her loyalty to our nation. The Empire cannot simply send every orc who wishes to live in the Empire to Scarsind and expect us to deal with the challenges they represent. We send, named priest, with 50 doses of Liao, to urge the warlords to return to Scarsind, to take up the mantle of the Reaver until the other 9 nations show their own courage and loyalty. Synod Mandate, Imperial Orc National Assembly. If this mandate were enacted, it would show support for Bracalo's arguments. For the next year, every Imperial Orc military unit would suffer a -1 rank penalty to their effective strength if they support an army, scout an area, or defend a fortification anywhere other than Scarsind. At the same time, they would receive a +2 rank bonus to any independent action they undertook, representing the focus on gathering wealth for their nation. This will also prompt other opportunities to encourage other nations to help with commissions needed to reassure the Septs, or support the various Orc refugees that have come to the nation. If the Imperial Orc Assembly does not enact a mandate, then Stonecliff Bracalo will continue to gather support, amplifying the dissent in Scarsind. A Sound of Silence. Ilumrorm. The leaders of the Ilumrorm are called Mystagogs, and they are primarily shaman. Whilst they are not ready to join the Imperial Orcs, they are offering their aid in a specific matter relating to the Imperial Orc ancestors. Stone Crow Bracalo and her supporters are not the only visitors to Gildenheim between autumn and winter, but the others are considerably quieter. The Ilumrorm are the only one of the 3 Sept to have seen any kind of reassurance from the Imperial Orcs. Their concern that their spiritual beliefs might not be accepted was addressed by the late Stormcrow Scred, and as a consequence, they have been the most outwardly friendly of the Ossium Orcs. Not that that says too much. They don't have a huge amount to do with anyone more than a day's walk from their settlements in South Pine, but they do engage in a little trade. In the lead up to the winter solstice, it becomes clear that they have also been paying attention. One of their shaman, a middle-aged orc, named Mystagog Ilumrorm Ithgarn, leads a small group of her fellows north to Gildenheim. They want to visit the Legion's rookery and speak with the priests and shamans there. Ilumrorm Ithgarn is soft-spoken, but occasionally cocks her head as if listening to a voice only she can hear. She explains that the Ilumrorm have been deeply impressed to hear of the Imperial Orcs' stand against the Imperial alliance with the Thule. It's clear she doesn't know exactly who everyone involved is. She is no expert on the Empire or its politics. Coming from the Malum, however, her people have very strong views on anyone who enslaves others, and those who justify cooperation with them to themselves. It seems that she is also aware of the efforts of Bloodcrow Udu in making to gather the bones of Imperial Orc ancestors from Imperial territories. Apparently, some of the Ilumrorm spoke with a Varushkan trader passing through South Pine on their way to Torfast trading post. The Mystagog clearly approves of this, at least in theory. The Ilumrorm revere the physical bones of their ancestors, whether they hear their voices or not. They appear to believe that the living serve to anchor the spirits of the dead to the world, forming one side of the bridge across the howling abyss that allows any orc to cross to the lands beyond. It is the memory of the dead that forms the foundation of that bridge. If they did join the Imperial Orcs, then including the bones of the Skarsin dead alongside the bones of the Ilumrorm dead would be a vital step. But most importantly right now, after a year of cautiously getting to know the Orcs of Skarsind, they have become aware that the Imperial Orcs have a problem. Not a problem of their own making, a problem created by the Empire in centuries past. Specifically, they have a problem with their ancestors. And the Ilumrorm want to offer a little help, if they can. This is not to say that they are ready to share their lore with the Imperial Orcs, or to join their nation, but compassion and sympathy mean they don't want to stand by and watch the Imperial Orcs, especially their shaman, suffering. The problem they're referring to is that of the three types of ancestors the Imperial Orcs can hear. Two of them are either constantly angry and incoherent, or afraid and incoherent. It seems the Ilumrorm sometimes have to deal with this kind of ancestor voice themselves. Nobody who lives under the Druge is unfamiliar with them. One of the reasons they hate the Druge is that they twist people, filling them with fear, and that because orcs hear the voices of their dead, that fear becomes almost impossible to avoid. Over the centuries, however, they have developed a form of meditation that allows them not to silence these voices, because the Ilumrorm think it is a bad idea to ignore any ancestor, no matter how frustrating they may be, but to distance them, to quiet them, and in some cases calm them. They are prepared to teach this technique to any orc shaman who wishes to come study with their mystagogs for a season or so. The principles can be taught relatively easily, but they can take quite a while to master. An offer of peace. After speaking with the shaman of the Legion's rookery, Mystagog Ilumrorm Ithgarn believes that helping Imperial Orcs to quiet these voices of their intrusive ancestors will help them hear the voices of their more recent ancestors, the actual Imperial Orc ancestors, more easily. It's not going to be perfect, but it will help the Imperial Orcs build a new relationship with their dead. They don't want anything in return, they just want the Imperial Orcs to decide if they want to work with their Mystagogs or not. All that would be required would be a statement of principle in the Imperial Orc National Assembly with a greater majority that makes the Ilumrorm offer known to the nation and urges those troubled by their ancestors to visit them in South Pine. Exactly what effect this would have is unclear, but the Ilumrorm believe it would make it easier for shaman of the Imperial Orcs to deal with the disruptive ancestors that sometimes plague them. Mystagog Ilumrorm Ithgarn is open to communication from Imperial citizens. A winged messenger can be sent to them at Mystagog Ilumrorm Ithgarn, Ithgarn's house, South Pine, Skarsind. Cold alpine soil. Urende. The Urende are having a little difficulty adapting to the conditions of their new alpine homes. They have approached the Guardian of the Broken Shield for assistance, offering Orc's Root in return. The smallest of the three septs, the Urende, believe that the Druge conquest of Ossium was caused by jealousy, that the Druge sought to strip their ancestors of their secrets and force them into slavery. It's known in the recent past they were forbidden from learning the herbal arts, but they kept their knowledge alive in secret. Now they don't need to hide it anymore. They are beginning to cultivate new gardens. The Urende also seem to be the most curious of the septs about their neighbours. They are known to trade fine herbs, both the magical healing herbs and mundane but unfamiliar medicinal or narcotic herbs brought from Ossium for Crystal Manor, which they apparently use to enchant their herb gardens. Living in Solvay Hill, they have also begun to reach out to a bone setter or two who are visiting the House of the Broken Shield. They seem most interested in learning techniques to help their gardens prosper in the alpine territory that is now their home. So different to the warmer marshy ground that they are used to. Their enthusiasm for a proper garden has not been dampened. If anything, they are even more eager to gain assistance in overcoming the problems of the mountain soil. They are especially keen to find ways to cultivate cerulean mazarine, something the old soldiers who work at the House of the Broken Shield are very familiar with. 6 weeks after the autumn equinox, a small delegation of Urende visit the House of the Broken Shield with an offer. If the Broken Shield Guardian will share their understanding of cultivating cerulean mazarine in the mountains, the Urende will provide them with some of their precious Orc's Root harvest. It would be a simple exchange, a winged messenger sent to the Urende indicating that the instruction has been given, and then at the spring equinox the Guardians would receive 8 doses of Orc's Root. The Urende aren't prepared to share their secret lore for actually brewing Orc's Root, not until they are part of the nation, should that ever happen, but they believe the herb is valuable enough that it might be of use to the Guardian. Green Master Yorende Thufar is a prominent member of the Yorende Sept, who is open to receiving winged messengers from Imperial citizens. They can be reached by using the address Green Master Yorende Thufar, Tendershall, Solvi Hill, Skarsint. Roots twinned together. There is a tenuous connection between the Yorende and the Great Forest Orcs. In the past year, a few Navari stridings passing through Skarsint have had a handful of Great Forest Orcs amongst their numbers. The Yorende have spoken in the past of studying the lore of herbs and plants in peaceful Great Forest, and there is some evidence that they descend from an offshoot of that Baron's Sept. They are clearly separate, however. Both septs apparently believe in the idea of the Great Forest, a simple vast woodland in the time before history stretched across most of what is now the Empire and the Malum. The Yorende don't show any signs of sharing the Great Forest Orcs' peculiar belief in the guardian tree spirits, however, nor their affinity for weirwood. Yet it cannot be denied that both septs have a way with plants, one with trees, the other with humbler plants. Both septs seem surprised to encounter the other. By all accounts, the orcs of each group treat the others akin to very distant cousins who live too far away to visit. But when the Stridings leave Skarsind, a few Yorende go with them. Apparently the Baron's orcs have suggested to the Ossium orcs they may be happier in the south, in Thurunin, and then eventually beneath the boughs of the heart of Patat. For now, there is no sign that the Yorende as a whole are interested in moving yet again, with the prospect of a third move at some point in the future. As time passes, however, the offer of the Great Forest Orcs, who they understand and who ask very little of them, might become more appealing. Shacklebreaker's guests. Ethengraw. The Wintermark Assembly welcomes heroes regardless of their origin. News of their statement of principle and the creation of the Runeforge has reached the ears of the Ethengraw Orcs in Skarsint. Since seizing their own liberation, Orc citizens have been formed together into a nation based on a shared history of oppression, liberation, and loyalty. But as with their human counterparts, not all orcs share this history and culture. Whilst preserving the Imperial Orc nation and homeland, we should offer all persons that wish it, whether Imperial or otherwise, the opportunity to join any Imperial nation. Wintermark is home to 3 traditions bound in heroism and resilience. No hero should find themselves unwelcome, whether human, orc, Hyli, or Deva. All who share and reflect our nation's beliefs and culture are welcome to find their place in the mark. Shacklebreaker Thanmir Hrafnar, Autumn Equinox 384YE, Wintermark Assembly, upheld 326 to 0. Greater majority. Wintermark has enjoyed close relations with many Imperial Orcs in recent years. That began when some of the legions returned the crown of the 3 tiers to the people of the Mark. At the time, there was a great deal of jubilation, and even some shouted, 4 people, 1 nation, a reference to the traditional Wintermark celebration of the unity of the 3 traditions. The return of the crown ultimately led to many deep and profound consequences, not least of which was the extraordinary decision by Wintermark to give up Skarsind, so the Imperial Orcs might at long last have a home, a motion pushed in the Imperial Senate by elder statesman Thanmir Hrafnar. At the recent summit, Thanmir presented a statement of principle to the Wintermark Assembly, saying that no hero should find themselves unwelcome, whether human, orc, Hyli, or Deva. All who share and reflect our nation's beliefs and culture are welcome to find their place in the mark. It was passed unanimously with a greater majority, and has met with widespread approval by most people of Wintermark. Winterfolk understand that what unites them is their desire never to bend before the storm, to follow the hero's tale to its end without fear, and never to compromise even with themselves. If any living being can make such a claim, why shouldn't they stand and be counted with the mark? Beyond broad agreement, the message seems to stir few leaves. The Wintermark Assembly say many things, and most folk agree with them. But there is little the individual can do about it. Hyli joining the mark sounds a fine idea in theory, but it seems like a problem for other people. The egregore, maybe. Not that any of the Hyli show any of the slightest interest in becoming Imperial citizens. Nobody really has the slightest idea of what a Deva is, or where to find one. They apparently live overseas somewhere very far away. And of course the Imperial Orcs are well liked in Wintermark, but they have their own nation, so that doesn't really amount to much. There are more and more Thule about these days, and nobody really likes them very much. But that's not a problem either, because one word nobody ever used to describe the Thule was heroic. But little pebbles bouncing can bring down a whole mountainside. And while the impact of the statement takes a little time to materialise it does. Albeit not from any expected direction. Forges of Pride. The Ethengraw wish to rebuild their pride by regaining their martial might. Exactly how the Ethengror sept heard of Thanmir's statement isn't clear, most likely from a trader passing through Gildenheim. Regardless, they heard it, and by all accounts, asked a few questions about who the Winterfolk were and what they were about. Then they sent some of their number to find out more. Travelling with a Navarre striding passing through Hercynia, they made their way to Kalperheim in Harmmark and asked to speak to somebody in charge. Less than a dozen in number, the Ethengror emissaries certainly looked like they knew how to handle themselves. They are armed only with stout staves. Their leader introduced themselves as Amadi Thunderstone, third of his line, and says that he is a representative of the Ethengror king. They want to know more about this offer to come to the Sept of the Tears, this welcome that is being extended to any with the heart of a hero. What do the words Thanmir the Shacklebreaker mean? The Ethengror, by all accounts, are a proud people who once ruled the whole of Ossium until they were brought low by Dru's treachery. Their king wants to build a future for his people, but not if it requires them to compromise their pride, their knowledge of who they are. The Imperial Orcs are a fine host, but if the Ethengror are ever to stand on their own 2 feet, they need allies who can help them do that. They are very interested in what they see in Kalperheim, however. When they learn by chance of the plans to build a rune forge in the northern mountains, that interest intensifies dramatically. The Ethengror are mostly settled in Gildermark. They watch with interest as the ruins of the Gildenheim rune forge were excavated and sent west. Perhaps it was this that first sparked their interest in the neighbouring nation. As soon as the import of the rune forge is explained, they become extremely excited, and over the next few weeks there is further communication between the orcs and the humans of the Mark. Because if the Winterfolk are genuine in their desire to welcome orcs amongst their numbers, then the Ethengror are interested in testing that desire. Amadi Thunderstone is an emissary of the Ethengror king who is open to receiving winged messengers from Imperial citizens. They can be reached by using the address Amadi Thunderstone, High Hall, Gildenmark, Skarsint. A significant ask. Adding mundane forges and workshops to the rune forge would increase the cost to construct it by 45 wains of mithril. The Ethengror support for the rune forge would mean it does not count towards the upkeep of the Empire's rune forges. Essentially, it would have no upkeep cost. If the rune forge was built with the additions suggested, then the opportunity to build the Ethengror armory smithies would be lost. What has held the Ethengror back from joining the Imperial Orcs is a determination that they will not join their ancestors with those of any Imperial sept or nation until they can stand as equals, with weapons in their hands and armour on their backs. What is more, it is not enough to be given weapons. The Ethengror are too proud to accept gifts. They are determined that they will not take up arms until they are able to fashion their own. The Imperial Orcs have been kind, but the Ethengror need more than kindness. They need forges, armories and metals, and fire. There are apparently thousands of Ethengror living in Skarsint, all eager to take back for themselves the warrior legacy of their ancestors, before the Druze drove them to their knees. The Ethengror know a little about the skills of the weaponsmith and the armourer. They have not had a chance to put such skills into practice in generations, but they understand what is involved. If the Winterfolk are prepared to build them the forges they need, the people will leave Skarsint and come to Harmmark. They'll work the forges and arm themselves and study with smiths and crafters of Wintermark, and when the time is right, they'll ask the Winterfolk to judge them as equals. Alternatively, if the Winterfolk are prepared to trust the Ethengror, they could build additional forges for their use connected to the runeforge at Runegrot. If this were done, then the Ethengror would come to Harmmark. They would work at the runeforge as equals alongside the Winterfolk smiths. They would tend the fires and smelt metal, beat iron into steel, and learn the secrets of the runes, and then, again, in time, they'd stand alongside the Winterfolk and see if they were worthy to fight together against the darkness. The civil service estimate that these additions to the runeforge would increase the costs of that commission by 45 wains of mithril, 90 crowns of labour cost, but not noticeably increase the time taken to complete the project. They could be commissioned alongside the runeforge itself. However, the enthusiastic support of several thousand would-be smiths would mean that the forge at Runegrot would not count for calculating the upkeep of the Empire's runeforges. It would require no money from the Imperial Treasury to run, nor would it make other runeforges more expensive. A first step. The Ethengror could not become a part of Wintermark at the moment. Once they have armed their people with weapons of their own construction, once their pride is restored to them, the Ethengror would be interested in determining if their sept could stand alongside the 3 traditions of Wintermark, just as the Shacklebreaker invited them to do. They do not wish to become Steiner or Calavesi or Suak, but they are open to the idea that their sept might join the nation, standing and fighting alongside their new cousins if such a thing were possible. Emily and their people are clearly only vaguely aware of the problems of orcs joining imperial nations. While there seems to be little doubt that the Ethingraw have their own concept of heroism, not much is known about their beliefs or how their culture might mesh with that of Wintermark. They are known to have a strong warrior tradition, but it is also clear that centuries under the domination of the Druge might have left them with a limited ability to follow those traditions. For all their talk of pride, there's not much evidence that they have a strong grasp of the way. They are much closer to their ancestors than they are to any of the virtues. At the very least, people of all three traditions must be able to see the Eastern Sept as fellow winterfolk before they would even consider becoming part of the nation. When similar questions were raised in the Mornwald, it took a Senate appraisal to make clear the obstacles that would need to be faced, and there were a few useful suggestions about how challenges could be overcome. But providing the orcs with the means to arm themselves is the first step towards their sept becoming part of Wintermark, assuming that they agree with the sentiment expressed by Thanre Hafnar.